This next session is all about an incredible story of leadership and innovation by students and professors at Arizona State University, and our friend Eamonn Storr is going to be hosting this session. And so please join me in welcoming Eamonn and his crew to the stage. Thank you.
Let's take a seat. I've got lots of toys with me here. Let me just organise myself. Are we on the right minutes? Anyway, we've got a real treat for you here. This is for some of the things we've been talking about on this theme, mobilizing youth and voices to reimagine the climate future. And what we're going to talk about this morning is this afternoon is a really exciting program which these young ladies, Iveta and Saiarchana and Elizabeth have been up to. I think when we were planning for this session, there's sort of two really interesting themes that I think are kind of coming out of these overall sessions. One is, how do we get better at educating ourselves as a human race? Like, how do we get better at educating our politicians, the investment community, consumers? And we've heard some really good stuff on that. You know, youth versus gov really is about how we better educate lawmakers. And Mark, who has come all the way from the UK and shared his thoughts with us on Carbon Tracker, it's about better educating investors and the investment community. And then we've got Keisha talking about how you get from 500 homes a month to like 500,000 a month in the next 3 years, and the job we've got to do. I think it's just really interesting when we think about this step of education, what it actually means. And then the second theme is we're past the point of like incremental improvement. We're now at a point where all the conversations through this theme have been about it has to be something more radical than just steps forward. And I wanted to start with that radicalness. I'm going to start actually with Iveta just introducing herself and the girls and just give you a bit of perspective of who they are and where they're from. So maybe Iveta, you can talk about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about education before we show what is a really kick-ass project you're going to see.
Awesome.
And you're going to touch and feel it. So maybe start just by introducing yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm Iveta. I'm professor and associate dean of global engagement at Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. And I've been really fortunate to work with these amazing students and colleagues, with Saya and Lizzie, on the project that you'll hear soon about. But very quickly about myself, I'm originally from Latvia. I grew up during actually the Soviet Union, but at the end of my high school experience, the Soviet Union was falling apart. And this is when I got really interested in education, because education really was kind of positioned as this amazing force and vehicle that would help transform the society, right? From the Soviet Union eventually to the European Union, right? So it was one of the major vehicles for the societal transformation. And we also see a very similar use or function of education right now in this moment of climate crisis and environmental catastrophe, where policymakers, UN officials, international development agency representatives are really kind of zeroing in on education as one of the main solutions to sustainability. And so in Millennium Development Goals, we've seen education being featured very prominently. Then, of course, those goals were not met, and when they were replaced with the Sustainable Development Goals, education actually received its own SDG 4 separate goal specifically around education. Then the UN actually dedicated the whole decade to education for sustainable development. And when that decade was over, I think what we realized that despite all of these efforts, despite centering education at the forefront of the sustainability crisis, what we see actually the crisis escalating and deepening. And so my research currently focuses on trying to understand how is education itself implicated in the climate crisis, kind of starting with the assumptions that the type of education that we are currently that's currently dominant in our systems throughout the world, but especially in Western countries, is the type of educations that deepens the climate crisis, right? And just really briefly wanted to say, so the UN, so when the UN looks at the metrics on how to measure the SDGs, the education is usually measured by literacy rates and numeracy rates, right? And the assumption is that the more access to education do we offer to people around the world, the more that this knowledge and the literacy and numeracy will immediately and easily translate into climate action, right? And that's obviously not the case. So in fact, I wanted to also make that note. The world is the most educated, the most literate and numerate it has ever been in the history of the humankind, yet we are closest to the environmental catastrophe, right? So obviously the type of education that we are offering right now is not solving the problem, but in fact it only is deepening the problem.
We're the smartest and dumbest generation.
Yes. Unfortunately.
And I mean, as someone that's 15 years in this country, but with children both in England and in the US, we are obsessed with education here. We're obsessed with Ivy League. We're obsessed with, with individual success, exceptionalism. Like, how do you see that changing, right? From individual to collective. Is that something that you're pushing in what you do? I'm going to come to the girls next, don't worry.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we are trying to show in research, using empirical data, using also arts-based research, is that the current education system is really, at least in this country, but in also many other Western countries, is really positioned, its main purpose is articulated as a workforce supply for economic growth and development over environmental concerns, right? So we are teaching human exceptionalism. We are teaching through our schooling the hyper-separation from nature, competitiveness, individualism, all of the character traits that basically separate us further and further from nature, and also give us the arguments to justify exploitation of nature by humans. And so that has to be radically changed, right? And so you already mentioned from independence to interdependence, from human exceptionalism to kind of a more reciprocal relationship with nature, from learning about the world and about the nature to learning with the world and with nature, kind of changing, making these philosophical shifts, but also making pedagogical shifts, curricula shifts.
Yeah. And Elizabeth, hello over there.
Hello.
Can you talk a bit about what you've been up to at ASU, aside from your studies, you've got a big long title here. You are the Director of Partnerships and Engagement at the Sustainability Alliance. So just give us a couple of minutes on that.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Lizzie. Nice to meet you all. I am an undergraduate at ASU, and ASU, I don't know if you guys have heard about it yet so far. You might have heard it once or twice during this forum, but is really good at connecting students with sustainability, and I'm a prime example of that. When I first came to ASU, I had a bunch of issues I was passionate about, but didn't really have necessarily a mission to tie them to, and I wasn't directly interested in sustainability. I didn't really know what it was, but I luckily was presented with a role as the SDG coordinator with an organization called Changemaker Central. I had a mentor who was amazing and kind of launched me on this path into leadership and sustainability, and through working with the SDGs, I was able to recognize the intersectionality of sustainability and how everyone's involved, everything's connected, and how that ties to education. So through my career at ASU, I've been working with multiple student organizations in leadership positions, trying to bring together a community between the different student groups to collectively form around this mission of sustainability, not only at the university, but building the students into leaders that are going to go out into the world and create a difference too. So that's kind of been where the mission's at, and recognizing that education at the university, making sure people recognize that regardless of their discipline, sustainability is necessary, that they can contribute to this overall mission and make the world a better place, is where it's at. So that's what a lot of my work has been on with the Sustainability Alliance, bringing these groups together and working with outside partnerships such as the Turn It Around Cards team and the Sustainability Teachers Academy, which does K through 12 education too. So that's kind of my big overall summary. I'd love to talk with you guys about it later.
And Saya, can you share a bit about your journey?
Yeah, definitely. So I joined ASU 4 years ago. I just graduated. When I joined ASU, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was very lost. All I knew was that I wanted to help solve the problems of the world. But I didn't know where to go or how to do that. And what I love about ASU in particular was that they showed me the way. So I do a lot of things. I'm very interested in a lot of things. So I decided to triple major in psychology, peace studies, and global management. And never in my wildest dreams would I ever have anticipated that my life journey would bring me into sustainability work. But it did. And what's really cool was the people I met along the way that showed me that passion for sustainability. So I originally was involved in advocating for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as the president of the UN Club at my university. I also mentored students in their own projects around the SDGs. And then my life completely changed a year ago when I joined a humanities lab around feeling climate uncertainty. I stumbled across this lab very spontaneously. I was like, you know what? I love mental health and I love sustainability. Let me see what this lab can teach me. And that's where I met Iveta, and I had my climate awakening, quote unquote, where I woke up to the fact that we're living in a climate emergency. I knew climate change was happening, but I didn't know it was an extreme threat to life on Earth until a year ago. And when I discovered that, I remember going through so much despair and fear and grief. And then I joined the lab, and then I met Iveta, and then I joined this amazing project on how young people can be involved in the solution for Turn It Around cards. And that's how I got involved. And now my main work I do in climate activism is around navigating eco-anxiety and also using creative forms of activism. So I do research with the Global Mental Health Lab in California on how environmentalists around the world can navigate ecological grief and anxiety. And I also am the youth engagement lead for the Turn It Around Cards campaign, where I work with young people around the world to remind them that no matter who you are, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't need to be an expert in policy making to be a part of the solution. So yeah.
Two incredibly smart and eloquent young ladies, I have to say. What are you going to do next? You're out, you're done, you're in the big world. What happens?
Good question. I mean, I just graduated a few weeks ago. I'm still figuring that out. I know that my life journey is around giving hope to the world and solving climate change. And I kind of want to do that in a creative way. I want to see if I can become an ecological anxiety and grief counselor and work with environmentalists around the world to help them navigate the fear and the despair that they can go through. And I also want to work to continue to involve young people in this climate movement and to make sure that they are heard by policymakers. So I'm currently the youth engagement lead for the Turn Around Cards project that I'm hoping to continue working on over the next year or so. But yeah, I'm super excited. I don't really know where my life will take me. I do know that it's going to be around fighting climate change. And that's what I love about, in general, this journey in climate change work. You can do so much with this passion for sustainability.
You both have the same thing in common, though, which is interesting, which is you didn't come from activist childhoods, you weren't like in this space. It's like it's a thing that happened in the last relatively recent couple of years. Let's talk about Turn It Around, because it's such a beautiful project. Iveta, can you, like, what was the origin? Where did the idea first come into your head?
Yes, absolutely. So about 2 years ago, UNESCO launched a new initiative called the Futures of Education Initiative. And that's an initiative that usually UNESCO organizes every couple decades. So the last one was one of them was the Delors report, which some of you may have heard about, but it's this very huge global collective exercise that brings together people from across the world, across the disciplines, to kind of step back and reassess where we are and kind of how education should be reimagined given all of the shifting geopolitical climate landscapes, right? And so 2 years ago, UNESCO launched another exercise, and I have some friends who are working within UNESCO running this initiative, and so we had really interesting conversations as they were thinking who should be on the steering committee leading this work. And despite suggestions from many different groups and people, UNESCO decided actually to form the steering committee with major experts in the field of education, with former actually presidents. It was led by the current president of Ethiopia. It had a former president of Latvia on its committee, the steering committee, major well-known professors, politicians, university presidents, but no youth. And I was absolutely shocked by that, and many others too. And to me, kind of the question was, how can we be engaging ourselves in this radical reimagination of the future, education futures, without the people who will be living those very futures? So to me, that was just this really incredible moment, especially at a time when the children and youth have been on the streets striking, demanding to be heard, right? And here we have this major initiative that is led without the voices of the youth, right? And I thought, well, does not make any sense, right? And kind of started thinking, how can we engage the young people, how can they be part of envisioning this future, right? And if they cannot be part of envisioning the future formally as part of the UNESCO project, perhaps we can start a parallel project, right? And crowdsource youth visions of education futures. And this is how the project basically started. I had also a really great friend and lots of supporters at the Open Society Foundations who said, well, we'll give you a very small grant to get you started on this project. And then I came across another professor, Adrian Jenek, at ASU, who is a professor from the School of Art, who was teaching the humanities lab that Saya was in. And so I came to the class, shared the idea, and actually from day one. So I only had a question. Actually, I did not have an idea. I had a question. So how can we mobilize the voices and visions of youth in reimagining education futures in the context of climate crisis? And all I did actually was just come to class and ask the question, right? And so this is where this really incredible conversation started to unfold and rolled into this project that I say took a life of its own. It's a little bit out of control right now.
So how did the project, because you talking about your background, so you get a sense then of the psychology and the sort of the rigor and magic of the sort of the art and the science. Like, how did the project come to life? You come and asked a question, and then you girls did what? Where did the idea of the art come from? Like the simplification of the idea.
Definitely. So I think something to acknowledge with climate change is that climate change is a global issue and every corner of the world to be touched by it. How can we communicate with people from all corners of the world universally? And what I love about art is the most universal language in the world. No matter what language you speak traditionally, whether it's Spanish, English, Hindi, Chinese, you can always communicate and connect with art. And I feel like art is one of the most powerful ways to connect with people across the world. And we wanted to take a creative approach towards getting youth involved in climate change, because oftentimes when you think about sustainability and climate change, you think about how you need to be informed in all these technical scientific terms or technical policy terms. And we wanted to make sure that we extended the table so that anyone who was young who wanted to be involved, whether they were artists, poets, writers, or dreamers, had a voice at the table, which was why we decided to include art in it. And I think something really cool about today's society is that there's this new form of activism called creative activism, where you use creative modalities like social media, art, poetry, and writing, and film to communicate change and to advocate for climate action. So we mainly use social media to communicate with young people around the world. And that was was our main form of connecting with and getting people from all corners of the world to send us artwork and writing. And our team was very small, but we did it. And we did it in about maybe 4 months. We got all the artwork from all these different areas of the world. We had a team of youth environmental leaders review them, and then we had all those decks printed and ready to go for COP26 in November, where we went to the United Nations Climate Change Conference to share these pieces of work with everyone there. So it was a very quick journey, but it was also very fun and creative, and so many different minds came together for it.
So Samantha, can you bring up the cards on the screen? We'll go to that slide, and what we're going to do is we're going to share these with you in a minute, but before we do, I just want, where did the idea of the flashcards come from? There's two things I really love about this is the elementary element of flashcards, right? It's how we teach our children to learn, learning dynamics. And we're taking that and flipping it, right? We're flipping, the students are giving this to the adults and the politicians and saying, let us help get you back to some basic understanding of things. And the second thing is it's such a beautiful analog thing in a digital world. We're getting back to like drawing and art and paper. Where did that spark? Elizabeth, do you want to talk about that spark, Lizzie? Or like, who had the idea of flashcards? Like, that in itself is brilliant.
Yeah, that came, I can maybe talk about it a little bit. That came spontaneously also in, the common conversations we had, right? And brainstorming. And remember, you're talking here about educators, right? People that are, deeply studying education, latest technologies in education, but also the most basic tools in education, right? And yeah, we thought about how, the whole education system, again, is so hierarchical, right? And so I think flashcards is maybe also this example of where adults decide what are some of the important basic facts and use flashcards to teach these facts to the kids, right? And we were thinking, so what are some of the basic facts that children in youth around the world think adults in decision-making boardrooms should know when they make decisions about the futures of the next generation, right? So I think it partially came from that educational background that we share, but actually also partially came from the my colleague, Adrienne Yannick, who is a professor of art. She also has this amazing, actually 2 amazing projects. She works with cards quite a lot, but not flashcards, right? So she has a Eco Tarot card deck that she developed, and she reads climate futures to people, including to policymakers at COP26, which was absolutely brilliant. And she also developed a grief deck, which is kind of like just playing with ideas of cards, right? And so as we were talking with students, with Adrienne, I think flashcards just very naturally emerged, and we said, let's reverse it. So it's like flipping not just the content, it's basically saying that everything must change, and everyone.
And I'm going to ask, we've got some helpers who are just going to give them out. I think we really wanted you to actually touch and feel these. So take a few, there's a few people handing them out. Take 2 or 3 of them, because we're just going to finish this session just having maybe just a quiet moment just to look at those, feel them, think about them. Because these arts come from how many countries?
I think 44.
44 kids from 40. This idea came out of a lab in ASU in 44 countries. Children from 44 countries have come together to share these. What success have you had with it? Just who's got them? Where have they gone? Someone tell us about that.
I mean, they've gone in so many different places, and I love how much this project has grown since last year. We traveled to the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in Scotland, and we gave it to world leaders there, including John Kerry, the US Climate Envoy, Patricia Espinosa, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We gave it to delegates from Korea at the conference, delegates from China, and honestly, anyone who is interested and who was involved in this policymaking process. We also shared it with youth activists there and decision makers there, and it's been so cool seeing the project expand from there. We now have a policy report based focused on interpretation and analyzation of this artwork. So now we have policy suggestions to give to world leaders around the world. We're going to Paris in actually 2 weeks for a UNESCO exhibit to display this artwork with world leaders there. And we're also working with Southeast Asian countries right now to expand the card deck and artwork more, to make sure that we're broadening our scope and our outreach and also elevating the voices of youth in these Southeast Asian countries. So our project has definitely been growing a lot, and also on social media, if you have Instagram, we're turning around cards on social media, and we've been talking to a lot of youth activists on social media too. So there's definitely a lot of different areas of our project. Feel free to fill in anything.
Can you
Well,
buy
actually,
them?
I wanted to ask Lizzie, because Lizzie could talk a little bit about the pedagogical materials that we are about to begin developing, and Lizzie's like a very central part of that.
Yeah, and Saiarchana covered like this project starting with educating policymakers, but it can also come back to educating other youth. So I mentioned it before, I work with the Sustainability Teachers Academy at ASU, and everywhere at ASU has probably heard about this project so far, and everyone's a huge fan, but at this academy, and also with the Turnaround team, we've been looking at how to bring these cards into the classroom and create materials around that, and also to educate educators on how they can rethink how they're teaching their students to connect with nature and kind of take away from that anthropocentric view we've had with education and start recognizing ourselves as part of the environment ourselves.
And to give credit to UNESCO, I wanted to say we have been invited to exhibit the artwork from the cards in an art exhibit in UNESCO on the fence surrounding the UNESCO. They will blow the cards up in the street-size posters, and about 30 of them will be on the fence around the building, as the education ministers will be coming to the pre-summit on education that will be happening at the end of June. So they will directly see the words, the visions of youth about, and remember what those words and visions are when they go into the meeting rooms to make decisions about our futures.
I love them. I love the simplicity of being able to give that gift to someone quickly, that they can get it. It's not a report that they've got to read or give to their staff. You got to get it straight away. I love that it's analog and you can touch and feel it. And I love this idea of like trying to get the politicians and the adults in this world to get back to basic learning of the facts with this beautiful art. So thank you for this amazing project. It's so lovely to share it today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.